Hello everyone, this is Dr. Purnima, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Vasant Kanya Mahavidyalaya, admitted to the privileges of Banaras Hindu University. And now we have reached towards the end of Module 1, Week 1 of the lecture, Postmodern Art and Literature, Theory and Practice. And in Lecture 5, we are going to discuss impact of modernism, residual and emergent culture. In earlier part of this lecture series or the 5 lectures of module 1, we have discussed that how modernism was very influential in shaping postmodernism. So some of the cultures that remained in postmodern time were residual. They were part of the things that were there in modern culture, and some of them were emergent culture. So new forms were also coming up and they were mixing with the already existing old forms. So this residual and emergent culture is what we will discuss in this lecture 5, impact of modernism, residual and emergent culture. So when we talk about modernist art movements and how it influences postmodernism, then there are various questions that comes to our mind, and we see that why these remained or why they were so influential. So what was modernism doing? Modernism was questioning. It was a time of realism. Naturally, it was time of anxiety, nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism. All these things were there. And what were they doing? These new isms or new forms of theories that were coming up in the modern times. What were they actually doing? They were questioning the traditional aesthetics. So, whatever is there, that was questioned. And representations were also questioned. So, everything that is there in literature and art was seen from a very critical perspective. So whatever was represented by till now by white supremacist or patriarchal attitude was being questioned by the society and was being questioned by art and literature and artists and writers. So the most important of it were the Dadaists, and the term Dada was meaningless. So there was no meaning of what they were producing. So Dadaists were actually using nonsense, meaningless things, randomness, and they were directly inspired by postmodernist experimentation and establishment attitude. So they were also questioning that. So the 4 important art movement that we are going to discuss is Dadaism, Cubism, Surrealism, and Abstract Expressionism. To some extent, we have considered Dadaism earlier. So basically, Dadaism was talking about in poetry. It was a Dada. There were a group of poets who were influenced by Dadaism, and they were producing meaningless poems. And when it was something that was randomly written without any coherence, without any meaning, and it was only done for funny effect that it produced. Then there was Cubism. The most important person who was following Cubism was Picasso. And what was Picasso doing? He was using geometric patterns. And these geometric patterns, they were creating a kind of fragmentation of the picture. And that Cubism also had its impact not only on art of postmodern times, but it also had a very strong impact on literature of its time. So in literature also you will see that there is a fragmentation of narratives, and there is a juxtaposition of narratives also. So that happens in the modern times, and it is one of those residual cultures that is copied forward to postmodernism. Then we have discussed it earlier also, that a lot of impact of hyperrealism and simulacra and simulation was there, and post-truth was there. So dreams were given a lot of importance, and we have also discussed psychoanalysis, and we have talked about Freud and Lacan. So all this was talking about the subconscious, and subconscious is represented in the dreams and fears. So that is what surrealism talks about. And then it was the time of abstract expressionism. So emotions were expressed through abstraction, and this was a very new form that was mixing of abstract art form and the expressionism art form. So all these residual art movements are something that we'll consider in this part of our. So when we discuss the modern styles of art, there are 2 important styles, and why we are discussing these 2 styles, because they mix together and they form abstract expressionism. So the one of those style is expressionism. So what is expressionism? The word expression comes from expressing, and expressing, what are we actually expressing? We are expressing our moods or feelings. then our proportion may be changed to understand something. So what they were doing in expressionism was that if you have to focus on something, so you will increase it in size. So the focus of the audience is shifted because of the change in proportions of the image. So that was a style of innovation that was happening in expressionism. And then forms may look very flat because they are using with spaces, so they are making it not look real by making it look very flat, because the undulations, spaces are never flat, there's some undulation on it, surfaces can never be very flat. So that kind of unrealistic kind of image was given through expressionism, and it was also challenging realism. And fine details were often ignored in expressionism, so it was basically colors and patterns that were very important. And it was not exactly copying nature, it was not realistic, so it was also a kind of revolt against realism. So within modern framework also, you will find that one form that is coming emerging, that is also questioning the earlier forms, and that continues in the postmodern times. Then we come to abstract art. So, what is abstract art doing? It is emphasizing on the design and art material used. So, no longer the form is no longer important. And now you're not just copying. So, the image that you're copying is not a replica, but it is just formlessness. So, formlessness was given a lot of importance, and you couldn't recognize it at times. It was not very recognizable what form or subject is there. So, it is more about the interpretation. So again, that is the impact of reader response theory, or that is the impact of multiple meanings. And it is also decentering depth of the author. So it is more about the audience. So how the audience perceives art, they decipher the art and they give meaning to art. And then composition is very important, how you're producing it and what impact it is having on the whole, as a whole, on the eyes of the audience. That composition was more important than the form that was created. So it was more a formless kind of art. And it was also not trying to copy nature. So when these two forms merge together, they create abstract expressionism. So there is no form left, and expressionism technique also joins hands. So we have discussed it, but this is one of the very important aspects of postmodernism. So we are discussing it in greater detail now, and that is surrealism, because surrealism is again something that has a lot of impact on art, painting, literature. So it is surrealism, which literally, when you translate it, it means that it is more than realism. So it is more, sometimes the dreamlike sequence is more real than real. And what is happening is that visual images are drawn from the subconscious mind. So it is more psychological, and it is also psychoanalytical, because you are trying to witness your own fears, your own desires. Sometimes conscious minds hides our own fears and our own desires from our mind. But subconscious is actually, it is also talking about what we are hiding from ourselves. It is also talking about the libido. So all these things are represented in the visual images that are created by surrealism. And then it is also having that fragmentation and juxtaposition of images. So something like the bricolage, where you are merging different style, here there is the juxtaposition of images. And it is confusing at times, like we were talking about the shoes, the feet, and the boot that we were talking about in Marguerite's painting. So it is confusing at times, that is it a boot or is it a feet. But it is also very interesting, because when you are creating something from your subconscious mind, it doesn't actually exist. So it is not realistic, and it makes people think. So it becomes very interesting. Like Dali's melting clock. When you think about it, you think about the time is, we often look at clocks as very important. We have to be on time, we have to be disciplined. But melting clock shows that there is no time foundation, and you can allow the time to melt, or you can look at it in so many different ways. Again, the audience response, or the viewer's response, becomes very important when you're trying to psychoanalyze a work of art. So it represents dreams and it represents fears. And you, again, because it is taken from dreams, and dreams doesn't have a linear narrative, so linear narrative is also questioned. And it is also creating strange scenes and events and unusual ideas. They're all merged together in surrealism. and the scale is impossible. So they create such kind of things that you, when you look at it, you know that this cannot be real. So Andre Breton was a writer, realized the superior reality of dream, and they also considered it in art, and he inspired the painters of the time to create more narratives or more arts of surrealism. So, why surrealism is important? Because it is psychological and psychoanalytical. So, it talks about madness. We have already discussed the madness and schizophrenia and neurosis and paranoia that has seeped into the age of postmodernism. So, that madness can be created and recreated through surrealism. It is also by memory. So, what does memory do? It sometimes exaggerates, it sometimes vilifies, it sometimes makes it smaller than it actually is. So that scaling, that impossible scale, very small or very large, or a falling man, all these things are created. And there is chance and there is coincidence, and all these beautiful images that cannot exist in reality are merged together in surrealism. So, yes, the very good examples of surrealist painting would be Salvador Dali's Melting Clocks, James Gleason, The Creation of Eve, where there is this abstract image in a very surrealist way, and then Merritt Oppenheim's The Breakfast in Fur. This is also a very interesting image of a cup and a saucer and a spoon. And this cup is not made of porcelain or china, but what it is made of? It is made of fur. So we cannot imagine a real cup made of fur. So this is again how surrealism works. And that furry cup also gives it a magical kind of appearance, and also gives it a kind of unrealistic appearance, and also gives it an animal like being because it is made of fur. So that a lot of interpretations can be given to a work of art that is surreal. So, and then we have talked about Dadaism, and Dadaism is in art and it is also there in literature, and we can see it as a precursor to postmodern and conceptual art. So, in postmodern and conceptual art, you will see that there is fragmentation, and there is structures, and there is random juxtapositions. And why it was being created, why Dadaism became so popular in the postmodern time? Because the two world wars has already happened. This is the historical reality of postmodern time. So, what is it opposing? Dadaism is opposing war, because when you are creating war, you are going towards a meaningless society. It is opposing reason. It is also opposing nationalism, because postmodernism is a time of multiculturalism. It is a time when all the cultures are coming together. So one nation cannot be superior to another nation. So nationalism, or we can also realize that nations are arbitrary. There is no fixed boundary of a nation, and human beings are the same. So this is a time of globalization, this is a time of multiculturalism. So nationalism is also questioned by these modern techniques, which also is a part of the residual culture of postmodernism. And it is also an opposition of bourgeois culture, because it is also an opposition of capitalistic culture. When capitalism, we know, that is all pervading and all prevailing in the time of postmodernism, but it has to be questioned and it has to be critiqued from within. And that is what happens in the art of Dadaism. So, yes, it is promoting nonsense, it is promoting absurdity, and it is promoting randomness. But this nonsense, absurdity, and randomness is not without meaning, and it is with a purpose. And that purpose is served through the collages in painting, fragmented structure, juxtaposition in literature also. In literature also, there is a lot of random images and fragmented style that comes up. Especially in modern poets, you will find that there is a lot of fragmented writings that are being written. Then there is a nonsensical language. Nonsensical language is also, I think, a result of Derridian deconstruction, because language no longer has a fixed meaning, so any random word could be used. So it is chaotic, it is anti art, it is anarchic art with random and absurd slogans, and literature tears down the structures of language and culture. So even language and the logocentric world is questioned and a neologism is born. So, and how, what kind of art are being produced? So, ready made art. We have discussed Duchamp. So, works of Marcel Duchamp were ready made. You bring a urinal, you keep it for display, or photo montage, you put it there, or performance art. All these kinds of art came up in postmodern time. And it came from anti-war sentiment, it came from absurdity, and it was a critique of logic of both in art and literature. So the works of Duchamp, Hannah Hoche, Tristan Zara, and Dadaist poetry can be seen as an example of Dadaism in art and literature. Then we come to Cubism. So again, Cubism also has similarity with Dadaism. It also uses fragmentation, and what it offers through fragmentation is multiple viewpoints. It also is using flattened space, and it is using monochromatic color schemes. And this is the early form of Cubism. And it focuses on form rather than color in the early stages. So, brown, grays, and neutral colors are used, and the collage elements are used there in later Cubism. So, I think Pablo Picasso is the one who has used a lot of geometric shapes, and he has brought together various forms, and that is what continued in the later times also. And it also uses new materials. So see, this is a time of experimentation and innovation. So new materials are also being used. So newspaper, wallpaper, and cloth are also being used to create a synthetic kind of cubism. Example can be Braque's fruit dish and glass, which combines painting and real paper materials, and they together combine to make a work of art. Then we come to abstract expressionism. So it is more about abstraction over representation. It is about, actually, it is expressionism. So it is borrowing from expression, gesture, and emotion. And artists often use dynamic brushstrokes or drips, splashes of colors, and smears to convey raw emotion. Art was seen as an act or performance, and it was performative. So art is not just created and left. It was a performance, that like a theater artist. So art is to be felt, it is to be performed, and people get involved in it. So audience cannot be a passive receptor, but they also become a part of the process of creation of art. So the process mattered as much as the final result of the work of art. And it was large scale. So abstract expressionism was playing with canvases, huge canvases were used, and it was meant to engulf the viewer, creating an immersive emotional experience that when they're viewing art, they're engrossed in that art. And there was freedom, and there was intuition, and there was rejection of pre-planned composition. And artists often embraced improvisation, like they were the improv, as it is done in comedy, or it is done in stand up, and it is done in theater. So it was also applied, all these theatrical forms were applied to art. And that's why I said that importance of literature and art being read together is very important. And it is also a subconscious expression. So what is lying latent in our minds is also represented through abstract expressionism. And then there is also individualism. So every artist had a highly personal style, and they were not copying each other because they wanted, see, there is an anxiety of influence, and everything has already been said, and everything, and there is no dearth of content. So much content being created every day. So how will an artist stand apart from others? So that's why they were all kind of experimenting and trying to create their own kind of art. So every artist had a highly personal style, and the movement celebrated subjective experience and existential freedom. So the freedom of that a person can enjoy, and they enjoyed their experiences of creating art. So art became creative when it took the form of abstract expressionism, and it later led to the development of conceptual art. So we can take the example of Edvard Munch's The Scream. It is a very important modern painting, and Jameson also, when he talks about late capitalism, because according to Jameson, what is late capitalism? Late capitalism is the postmodernist phase of capitalism. So this what do we see in this painting? We see that a man, or we can see an image of a man who is just closing his ears, and there is a lot of scream. And how is the scream represented by the brush strokes? So the noise which cannot be heard is captured through the brush strokes, and it is also capturing the anxiety of the modern man. So, and again, nature is not shown, but feeling and emotions are expressed through this form. So this is how expressionism, abstract expressionism, and abstract art forms, they merge together in the modern time. Real, and it also led the way to the creation of postmodern art and literature, because in further, when we will understand postmodern art, we will understand that we cannot understand postmodern art unless and until we understand the influence of modern art on postmodern art and literature. A bit we will discuss about conceptual art. So it is art in which the idea or concept behind the work is more important than the finished art object itself. So this is also something that already had appeared in Cubism and abstract expressionism. So concepts became very important. And it was the movement that emerged in the 1960s and 1970s as a reaction against traditional aesthetic concerns and the commercialization of art. So now why do we need conceptual art? Because everything is becoming a commodity, everything has a price tag. So there were certain artists who were revolted by it. So they thought that we should be creating an art which will make people think, because inability to think is also a problem of postmodern time, when there people are consuming goods and services and art without actually getting any meaning out of it. So it challenged the assumption that art must be beautiful, tangible, or made by skilled hands. So they were more about how it is produced and how people are perceiving art. So the idea became a machine that makes the art. So conceptual art was also, art can also be, nowadays we can create art through various softwares, through various programs, and that also has certain meaning in it. So again, this whole idea came very back in the early stages of postmodernism, and that also leads to the question that what age are we living in? So are we still in the postmodern time, or some writers have coined the term transmodern. So, in the next few lectures, we'll also understand the concept of transmodernism, or a time after postmodernism or post postmodernism. So, what time we are living is still not defined, and this lecture on postmodernism also makes us question that what are the art forms that are living today and how we are dealing with these art forms. So we come towards the end of today's lecture. So I would like to thank you, and if you have any questions, you can put your questions. And by the end of this lecture, we will also have the MCQ and MSQ questions. So if you have any doubts, you can ask. And the MCQ and MSQ questions, multiple choice questions, you have only one right answer. And in MSQ questions, you have multiple answers that could be correct. So you have to just take the right answers, and you will be graded accordingly for the MCQ and MSQ. Thank you.